Much to the astonishment of the rest of the world, the US always seems to be in election mode. We have been subject to non-stop media bombardment for months on the deep divisions and dynamics within the Democratic Party. And let's remember, this is a cycle where there is virtually no contest within the Republican Party. On February 3rd, the election cycle within the Democratic Party officially kicked off with the Iowa caucus. And immediately, the whole structure crashed. The latest numbers shows that the results of only 70% of the precincts in this small state have been reported. Before we discuss this mess and whether it's actually of any significance, here is a quick set of facts on the caucus itself and the election process. Held biennially, the Iowa caucuses are primary election events held by both the Democrats and the Republicans. They are closely watched and analyzed because they are the first major contest in the presidential primary season. These are small gatherings at churches, schools, libraries, party members' homes, and this time even at a mosque, and often include direct contests between the candidates. Unlike in other states, where registered voters cast ballots in primary processes, Iowans gather at these venues in their constituencies, discuss the candidates, and vote by a show of hands. This year, the Democratic Party introduced an app, supposedly to help them count votes without an error in what is a close race. Problems with the app, though, have delayed the counting process and made them a bit of a laughingstock in the party that will face Donald Trump in November. And we have Prabir Purkayastha to discuss more about this. Thank you, Prabir. Prabir, so as of now, as you said, 70% of the results are out, and it looks like Mayor Pete Buttigieg, who's the mayor of South Bend in Indiana, a very small town, he's leading by a very narrow margin, by about 2% or something. Bernie Sanders is next, and Elizabeth Warren and Joe Biden are trailing quite a bit behind. And by the delegate counts, it looks like so far it's divided between Buttigieg and Sanders. So before we go a bit more into the numbers, it's interesting to see that, this process, which marks the beginning of the election cycle, and it's already been a very long and exhausting discussion so far, was marked by so many errors, and it's a whole mess and confusion, and people are really confused about the whole thing.
Well, people would be still confused after the caucus and the counting is over, because the Iowa caucus is not as simple as a show of votes.
Right.
They apparently have three counts that take place. The process of viable candidates, unviable candidates, pooling of numbers, changing of votes that you can then cast,
right.
All of this go on. So I have been very superficially trying to read how this process unfolds, and I find that even the astute commentators of the election process have been either unable to understand or explain the process to us.
Right.
If this is true of American, shall we say, the cognoscenti, those who know this, supposedly know this stuff, like Nate Silver's website and so on, I think people like us have to give it up.
Right.
I think what's impressive in the amount of confusion they have created is that a small state, not a very big numbers that are involved, which could count earlier using phones, using pencil and paper, show of hands as you called it, have after the app completely crashed.
Right.
Now it's the third day running where we still have only about 70% of the votes counted, as you talked about. And here it seems it's a two-way split at the moment,
right.
with Warren not too far behind against 27% of Buttigieg, 25% of Sanders. She's 18%.
18%, right.
So she has not dropped out of the race. Right. If you look at the progressive side, and she, of course, is a question mark how progressive she is. She could very easily be the centrist candidate as well. But she is trailing by Sanders by about 7%. Biden is the real
loser
of the caucus,
right.
Iowa caucus, because he, from a front runner of the Democratic Party, which is what he's supposed to be, and he was expected to get a narrow margin over Bernie Sanders, he has dropped to 15%, way behind Buttigieg and Sanders both. So in that sense, if we look at the other side of the divide within the Democratic Party, that you have Buttigieg and Biden, who are right of center, and Warren, who's probably center but also considered by some as left of center, dicey on that.
Right.
But Bernie Sanders being the clear left progressive side of the divide, then the net loser seems to be Biden.
Right.
Now, Buttigieg, of course, is not a viable candidate in a number of primaries, and that's something which still puts put both Warren and Biden, keeps them in the fray, Biden into the fray. But I think the real damage of the Iowa primary would have been Biden, except for the fact that it is a mess. It has been messed up so badly that that
has become the issue.
That has become the issue, not who won and who lost. And otherwise, the takeaway would be that Biden had lost the Iowa primary, and that would have been a big takeaway from the Iowa primary. I think that has not come out. One can talk about conspiracy theories. Was this app purposely configured so that if Biden loses, the issue would be the app and the primary process itself and not who lost, who won? I think that's possibly too much of a conspiracy theory. I would just say it is incompetence of the Democratic Party. They could not properly safeguard their server, which could be hacked by anybody in the world. That's what the security analysts at that point said. That was the last election. And this election, they have outsmarted themselves by doing what pencil and paper would have done much better. So I suspect they have gone back to the next election. They might go back to Roman numerals and tried counting with that and not even use the place value notation.
So this, as you said, does not show the Democrats in any good light at all. And it's actually an ominous sign considering that Trump
I think
is
we
on a roll.
I should say the DNC, the Democratic National Committee in very poor light. And that is coming after the last elections, when they managed to get themselves hacked. And then the entire allegations about Russia hacking them was to hide the fact that they were incompetent in protecting their web and the basic server and website and all the other paraphernalia that goes with it.
But it's also a considerable challenge, because one of the aspects that was highlighted was that all the candidates have got some amount of support, and this is probably the most divided field in many election cycles. And what we're probably seeing is a long bruising round of campaigns with, say, especially the establishment itself shifting maybe from Biden to Buttigieg or Biden to Warren to maybe prevent Sanders from getting the nomination, and leading to a lot of internal conflict, which is really dangerous considering that Trump is almost on a roll within the Republican Party.
Well, as you said earlier, whenever you have an incumbent president, it's almost automatic that he becomes the candidate, unless there is a major disaster of some kind or the other. So given that, I think the Republican Party, Trump is on a roll, but he is the incumbent president.
But he did escape impeachment and all those processes to nonetheless
Well, the impeachment was a foregone conclusion with the Senate majority the Republicans have. So I don't think that was ever a question of that. On that, I think it is more the Democratic Party trying to keep Trump's various misdeeds in public view. So it's more a political act rather than real impeachment, if you take the numbers into account. And I don't think, therefore, there was much of a doubt that he would escape, as you said, from the impeachment. The real issue is the Democratic Party, at least the leadership of the Democratic Party, the DNC, they seem to be fighting Bernie Sanders more than even they would be fighting Trump. So their focus has been how to keep Sanders out of the nomination, which they did last time by essentially having pre-committed candidates, pre-committed votes, which would be the outcome of the primaries. So this time, what they will do, I don't know. But it is clear that for the DNC, they see Sanders as a much more dangerous figure for themselves, and therefore anybody but Sanders could be their basic mantra in this election. So we have to see how that plays out. Bernie Sanders is doing much better again than was expected. I think he has proved that he has a constituency, even in states like Iowa, where you could expect that the progressive section would not be that high. He has a lot of youth support, which is quite striking. It's not something that Buttigieg enjoys. For instance, Buttigieg seems to enjoy the older white population.
Middle-aged and older, yes.
Yeah, middle-aged and older population. Biden is being talked about as the more winnable candidate, but the figures that we see now don't seem to show that. So I think the Democratic Party, the National Committee, has a real challenge on its hands how to keep Bernie out. Will they sacrifice the party in order to do this? That's something to be seen, because I don't think Buttigieg or Warren would stand a chance against Trump.
Right.
And I personally do not believe Biden would also stand a chance, because he would come out as somebody who's, as Trump would say, a part of the Beltway, corrupt, etc., etc., etc. So he presses all the right buttons for Trump.
Right.
So Bernie Sanders, I think, would be a more bigger challenge for them, for him, for the Trump and Republicans. But you know, their point of attack, Bernie, is a socialist, and socialist means an enemy of the United States, except for the fact that today the number of people who have started saying they are attracted to socialism, because that old Russia Red Scare is no longer there. So the word socialist is not as bad as it used to be 25, 30 years back. So Bernie has made socialism look more attractive, and himself therefore also more attractive. And that's why you see the youth demography change the way it has. So I think this is an interesting issue, that if you have a clear left position, which is Bernie, and the American spectrum, we have to say he's a clear left position, may not be in various other places, and Trump a clear right position anywhere in the world, including the United States, I think that gives really a lot of distance between the two. And then we have to see how the voter would really play on this. So I suspect the Democratic Party's strongest candidate last time also would have been Bernie Sanders. I thought always Hillary would be a weaker candidate. And this is something which I would say this time Biden would be a very bad alternative to Bernie in order to take Trump on. But you know, fortunately or unfortunately, the rest of the world doesn't have a vote. I've always argued that given the fact that he's really the overseer of the world, the overlord of the world, so to say, that we may not have a vote, but we should have a veto. Who should not become the president of the United States. But unfortunately, we don't have a world state to assert that over the United States. So we are in this mess anyway.
And it's also equally important because especially the choice of the Democratic candidate will also have an impact on the policy of the US establishment and state itself, which is continuous, which has remained more or less continuous over the past decades. For instance, yesterday we had Bernie Sanders invite Juan Guaido to the State of the Union address.
Bernie Sanders?
I'm sorry. Donald Trump invite Juan Guaido to the State of the Union address.
I think you've already taken into consideration
that he is going
Bernie is going to become the president.
My choice is clear. Right. So we had Donald Trump invite Juan Guaido to the State of the Union address, which is almost an unprecedented move considering the amount of what has happened in Venezuela over the past year, the kind of suffering the US actions have caused, the sheer chutzpah of the move, as they would call it, to call a coup president who has been completely rejected by the people to the State of the Union address. So it's
let's put it this way. US believes that it has replaced the United Nations Security Council. It also believes that the US laws supersede international law. And one of the reasons it has been able to take this position, because more than what it has in terms of military power over the world, is the fact that it has a financial power over the world. They control the financial levers of power globally, particularly all the international transactions that takes place, because finally the clearing of all of this takes place in the SWIFT transaction system. And that, in the last 10 years, has been brought firmly under US law. It was originally the European outfit which did this. They set up a server in the United States. By virtue of that, the United States claimed that its laws now also apply to the SWIFT system. So because they control the financial levers, it can actually make statements that Guaido is the president. It can take away Venezuela's money, which is there in the international banking system. It can take the property it owns, particularly the United States, the refineries, and it can really, therefore, not only cause an embargo, but give the coup president, as you call it, or the somebody which US has anointed as the president, and give him a certain set of resources, including the foreign aid that the US supposedly gives Venezuela, which if tomorrow Venezuelans actually finally are able to overcome the so-called Guaido presidency, then America might want that money back from Venezuela. So all of this is really what you call the overlordship of the world, that America has become the overlord, global overlord, and we have the Dark Lord himself, Mr. Trump, deciding whatever he wants and calling this the foreign policy of the of the United States and has no relation to what anybody else in the world might accept, because as you know, I think roughly about only 10 to 15% of the countries that also lackeys of the United States have accepted Guaido as a legal president. Most of the world has not. So this is something so out of the world, so to say, that only this can happen in the United States, that they can decide what the reality is. Who cares what the real reality is?
Right. Thank you so much, Prabir. In our next story, it's been a month since the brutal attack by right-wing goons on the students of Jawaharlal Nehru University, an incident which shook the country. Students of left-wing organizations, including JNUSU President Oishi Ghosh, were severely injured, hostels were vandalized, and for a few hours, masked goons had a free hand. 1 month later, what has happened with the police cases, the struggle of the students, and what has been its implication on the country as a whole? Before we discuss this, here's a quick recap of the incident.
I have been brutally attacked by kids who wear masks. I don't know, I've been bleeding. I am not even in a condition to talk. I've been brutally beaten up. I was there with one of my activists.
That was some footage from the horrific violence last month. And to discuss more about this, we have with us our reporter Ravi. Ravi, thank you for joining us.
Thanks, Prasanth.
Ravi, so it's been the attack last month, what we saw on the 5th of January, really shook the country because we saw a university in Delhi, a very famous university, one of the most famous in India.
Prestigious indeed.
Exactly, in the center of the capital. And we saw armed goons basically thrashing hostels, beating up students, and then calmly walking out while the police were watching. So, in the months since, what has been, let's first start with the legal aspect. What has happened with the police cases? Has there been any action? So, could you just take us through the process?
See, the Prasanth, soon after this whole incident unfolded within the university campus, as we all know that the case was transferred to the crime branch.
Right.
Now, crime branch sent notices to several students to join the inquiry and then go ahead with the, let's say, investigation. But what we are witnessing is, the students have been interrogated, but there is no arrest, and that's the most significant part of it. That even after a month, Delhi police is not in a position to determine the fact that who were the people who invaded the campus,
Right.
who beat the students black and blue. To the extent that almost 35 students were injured. A teacher was badly injured, and nobody knows who attacked them.
Right.
I talked to a few students, let's say, when I went to the campus yesterday, and the feeling was that, the students are still in a state of trauma. They're struggling with the fact that yes, it has passed away, the violence has passed, and they need to move, but the psychological barrier is still there.
Right.
And once you start the conversation with them, it gets, you feel that how it's affecting them. So I met, let's say, one of the students. Sorry. So I met one of the students. I won't name him because he requested me the anonymity, but he said that he need to submit his PhD in July, and he need to write his thesis and all these things. But he was attacked, so he was dealing with this trauma. So right now he let's say studies for let's say 10 hours in the library, but what he said that I can't write even 500 words in the whole day because there's something stuck with me. He says that when I return to my room and my neighboring students bolt their doors, it affects me. It doesn't really going. So I met another student who said that given the situation and pan Delhi situation, they have the Delhi police conducted this press conference and they said that these are the students who could be accused in the violence, and their names were flashed, their photos were shown. Now these students are saying that we feel unsafe as soon as we move out of the campus because we really don't know that what the people will think about us and how they will respond to us. So that's the situation, and that's quite bad actually.
Right. Also, there was the struggle which is over the hostel fees. So could you talk a bit about what has been the major developments in the struggle?
Yeah, I mean, so the student got their, let's say, partial victory not from the administration, even after the 2.5 months of struggle, but from the court. Delhi High Court has actually instructed the university to register the students at the previous rates and not to increase the fee until the case is heard. So that's the position. The students are now giving their exams, and yeah.
Thank you so much, Ravi.
Yeah, thanks a lot.
That's all we have time for today. Keep watching NewsClick.